Somewhere in your house right now, there's a lock, a door lock, a phone lock, a car with a key. You trust it to keep danger out. But for most of human history, the thing that decided whether you lived or died on a given day wasn't a lock, it was distance. How far away was the danger? How fast could it reach you? And then, about 1,000 years ago, a group of monks looking for eternal life accidentally invented the device that would erase distance as a form of safety, forever preaching. They weren't trying to build a weapon. That's the strange part. Say that out loud to yourself. The gun was an accident. To understand how this happened, you have to go back further than guns. Back to fire itself. Your ancestors learned to control fire around 1 million years ago, and that single act split human history in two. Before fire, danger was something you outran or outclimbed. After fire, danger was something you could hold in your hand and push outward. A burning branch swung at a wolf, preaching. A lit fire at the mouth of a cave. Fire was the first tool that let a smaller, weaker creature dominate a stronger one at a distance without touching it. Every weapon invented after this point is really just a variation on that same idea. Push the danger further away from your body. Spears did this. Slings did this. The bow and arrow, invented somewhere between 60 and 70,000 years ago, did this even better. Preaching. Researchers working in South Africa's Sibudu cave, including archaeologist Marlies Lombard, found stone points with fracture patterns consistent with arrows, not thrown spears, dating back tens of thousands of years. That's a strange thing to sit with. Long before agriculture, before cities, before writing, your ancestors had already solved the basic problem that guns would later solve too. How do you hurt something without letting it get close enough to hurt you first? But bows had a ceiling, pitching, pull strength, arm strength skill built over years. A 15-year-old with a bow was not dangerous the way a 15-year-old with a rifle is dangerous. The bow rewarded practice. It punished haste. And that ceiling held for tens of thousands of years, through empires, through the rise and fall of entire civilizations, until someone in 9th century China went looking for something that had nothing to do with fighting at all. They were looking for the elixir of life, preaching. Taoist alchemists in China during the Tang dynasty spent their careers trying to formulate a substance that would grant immortality. This wasn't a fringe hobby. Emperors funded it. Entire schools of alchemy existed to pursue it, and in the process of mixing sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter, something searching for eternal life instead produced something capable of ending it almost instantly, preaching. The earliest surviving text to describe this mixture is a Taoist manuscript from around 850 CE, and it comes with a warning, not a celebration. It says the mixture had caused fires, had burned the hands and faces of the men working with it, had even burned down buildings. Think about that. The document that first records gunpowder is essentially a safety warning. Nobody understood yet what they were holding. They just knew it was hungry, preaching. For the next few centuries, this black powder stayed close to its accidental origins. It was used in fireworks, in signaling, in a kind of controlled spectacle meant to frighten enemies rather than kill them directly. Chinese armies experimented with fire arrows, which were essentially normal arrows with a tube of gunpowder attached, and with fire lances, bamboo or metal tubes that shot flame and shrapnel a short distance. These were terrifying, but they weren't guns yet, preaching. A gun needs one more idea. It needs a projectile that fits snugly inside a tube, so that the explosion behind it has nowhere to go except forward through the object in its path. That idea appears to have arrived sometime in the 13th century. Archaeologists point to a bronze object found in Manchuria known as the Heilongjiang hand cannon, dated to around 1288, as one of the earliest surviving true firearms. It is a squat, unglamorous tube of metal, preaching. It looks less like a weapon than like a piece of plumbing, but inside that tube is the entire future. Pack it with powder, pack a projectile on top, light a fuse. And for the first time in human history, a person could kill another person from a distance using nothing but chemistry and a straight metal tube with almost none of the physical skill a bow demanded. This is the part of the story that tends to get skipped, and it's the part that matters most. The bow rewarded years of training, preaching. The gun did not. A person who had never held a weapon before could, in theory, aim a hand cannon and kill a heavily armored, highly trained knight who had spent his entire life preparing for combat. That is not a small shift. That is a fundamental rewrite of who gets to hold power in a society. For thousands of years, physical strength, years of practice, and inherited status had determined who was dangerous. The gun didn't care about any of that, preaching. It flattened the hierarchy of violence almost overnight. And once that flattening happened, it could not be undone. Word of gunpowder and firearms moved west along trade routes through the Mongol Empire into the Islamic world, and eventually into Europe by the early 1300s. Historian Kenneth Chase has argued that the specific military and geographic pressures different regions faced shaped how quickly and how seriously they adopted firearms, and Europe, fractured into constantly warring, competing kingdoms, had every incentive to improve on the design as fast as possible. Where China had invented gunpowder, partly in pursuit of spiritual transcendence, Europe adopted it in pursuit of dominance over its neighbors, and that difference in motivation shaped the speed of innovation that followed. The early European hand cannons were clumsy. You needed two hands, and often a second person, just to fire one accurately. You needed to carry a smoldering length of cord, called a match cord, to ignite the powder, which meant you were walking around a battlefield next to open kegs of explosive powder with a lit flame in your hand. Rain made your weapon useless. Wind blew out your fuse. And yet, even in this crude, unreliable early form, the gun began replacing the bow on European battlefields within a few generations. Because the alternative to an unreliable gun was still a soldier who required a decade of training to be dangerous at all. Guns didn't need to be good. They only needed to be good enough and cheap enough and fast enough to train someone to use. By the 1400s, the matchlock arrived, a mechanism that let a trigger lower the burning cord into the powder automatically, freeing up a hand and improving reliability. By the 1600s, the flintlock replaced open flame with a spark struck from stone, making firearms usable in wetter conditions and safer to carry. Each improvement followed the same underlying logic that had been present since that Taoist manuscript in 850 CE. Take something dangerous and unpredictable and make it slightly more predictable, slightly more controllable, slightly more available to ordinary people. Here's where the story turns from military history into something closer to psychology. And this is the part that actually explains why this topic still matters to you today. Your brain evolved in a world where danger had a distance you could read. A predator's footsteps got louder as it approached. A rival's fist could only reach as far as their arm. Even early projectile weapons like spears and arrows required the attacker to be visible, aiming, drawing back, giving you time to register threat and respond. Psychologist and evolutionary theorist Daniel Fessler has written about how deeply human fear responses are tuned to specific evolutionarily relevant cues. Things like a snake's shape or a stranger's sudden movement, rather than to abstract or novel dangers our ancestors never encountered. The gun broke that ancient calibration completely. A gunshot can arrive with no warning. From a source your senses can't locate in time. From a distance, your ancestors' threat detection systems were never built to process. This is part of why the sound of a gunshot produces such an intense, almost disproportionate fear response in people, even those who intellectually understand firearms. Well, your nervous system isn't reacting to the gun as a modern object. It's reacting to an ancient, unresolved problem, a lethal threat with no visible source and no predictable range. The exact kind of danger your evolved fear circuitry has no good template for. This mismatch didn't stay in the 17th century. It's still inside you. Think about how differently you react to a knife versus a gun, even though both are objects that can end a life. A knife requires closeness. Your ancient threat system can price that in, can watch the distance, can calculate whether you have time to run. A firearm erases that calculation entirely, and so does, in a smaller but related way, everything downstream of it in modern life. The anxiety many people feel about threats they can't see or measure, financial collapse, disease, a bad diagnosis, a sudden piece of news, echoes this same evolutionary mismatch. Your body was built to fear things with a visible edge and a knowable range. It struggles badly with invisible threats and infinite range. The gun was the first invention to hand ordinary people that kind of danger. And once your species encountered a distance-erasing weapon, there was no going back to a world without it. By the 1800s, this trajectory kept accelerating in exactly the direction you'd expect. Samuel Colt's revolver, patented in 1836, let a single person fire multiple shots without reloading. The percussion cap eliminated the vulnerability of exposed powder. Rifling spiral grooves cut into a gun barrel made bullets spin, and a spinning bullet flies straighter and further than one that tumbles, the same physical principle a quarterback uses on a perfect spiral throw, discovered independently centuries earlier by weapons makers chasing distance and accuracy. Each of these innovations followed the identical pattern established by that first Taoist alchemist 13 centuries earlier. Somebody wanted more control, more reliability, more reach, and the gun kept answering that want generation after generation, incrementally, until the hand cannon that needed 2 hands, a lit rope, and dry weather became a weapon that could be aimed, fired, and reloaded by one person in seconds, in almost any condition. Pritching. Here's the twist that most people never sit with, though. The elixir of life never worked. Nobody who searched for immortality in 9th century China found it. The alchemists mixing sulfur and charcoal and saltpeter were chasing eternal life and instead created the single most efficient tool humanity has ever built for ending it. Pritching. Every empire that followed, every battlefield, every locked door in your house right now that exists partly because of what a firearm could do to someone trying to get through it, all of it traces back to a failed spiritual experiment. There's something almost unbearably human about that. Pritching. The 2 most powerful drives your species has ever had, the drive to live forever and the drive to kill efficiently, turned out to be sitting right next to each other in the same clay pot, waiting for the wrong combination of curiosity and heat. You don't carry a matchlock or a flintlock today. Pritching. But you carry the nervous system that first learned to fear them, wired now to flinch at sounds you can't locate, to feel unsettled by dangers you can't measure the distance, to sense somewhere underneath conscious thought that the rules of threat changed permanently the day a monk mixed the wrong 3 ingredients and didn't burn down his own room only by luck. You were looking for eternal life. Instead, you learned exactly how fast a life could end.